You must be the ape man. Well, then that must make you the Batman. Correct, but I'm looking for the walrus.
Who got you?
Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Player Display. I'm really excited for this one. So literally a day after I reviewed the Gorilla 2-pack and Dr. Zaius, we now have our Comic-Con exclusive 3-pack from Planet of the Apes, including the Conquest Gorilla, Caesar, and General Aldo. And I am very much looking forward to these guys. To give you an idea of how important these three are to me, mainly Caesar, is I'd put him on the same playing field as the Phantom Gremlin, where he was a figure that released years ago before I actually had a wallet, and I've been thinking about this figure ever since then, and it was only at this very moment in time when I was able to acquire him, and I really love Caesar, Roddy McDowell, and I also really love these two other figures as well. They'll help to pad out the gorilla army that I'm slowly building, right? So anyways, I'm going to do a pretty quick unboxing, really just to show you what the overall box looks like, because it is very unique. So anyways, let's go ahead and start. So the three figures that we have are the Conquest Gorilla. I know it gets a little dark, tilt it up a little bit. There we are. Then we also have Caesar, of course. Then we got General Aldo. We also have their three corresponding portraits along the bottom, looking very cool, along with a Toys R Us exclusive sticker, which kind of throws me off because I know this was a Comic-Con exclusive, so I don't know, maybe Toys R Us also distributed the same pack as well. I really don't know, but they're identical if there are two different versions of them. Off to the sides, we have Planet of the Apes Series 3 bundle, 7-inch figures. Off to this side, exactly the same from what I can tell. We also have the different ranking insignias of the apes. On the back, same picture that we've seen before, the damn you all to hell image of the Statue of Liberty, Planet of the Apes once again, and we also have individual bios for each of these figures, which you can go ahead and read. And I imagine once I open this box, each figure is contained within its own unique box, and they'll probably have the exact same bios, but for now, there you are. Off to the bottom, if I flip this guy upside down, we have our usual case of
C. Green Arrow.
And naturally,
Start audience!
also a look at the fine artists who made these figures possible. Here they are again, this time a little bit more visible out of the main packaging. It's pretty much all the exact same images and motifs that we saw before, but just to brush through them quick, here's Conquest Gorilla once again, a little bit easier to see. On the side, instead of a logo, of course they didn't develop their culture yet, so he gets a big old badass riot shield, which I really love. It's beautifully, minimalistically, like 70s. I really love that aesthetic a lot. Same on this side. On the back, same image as we get with the single release figures, along with the exact same bio, and the other two figures in this wave. Off to Caesar, exactly what you expect. We have Caesar at the bottom, got Caesar in the box. Off to this side, got the Chimps logo. Same on this side as well. On the back, exact same backing as the other packagings. Then lastly, we have Aldo. Once again, Aldo, another Aldo, gorilla logo, same back. And there we are. Perfect. Alright guys, it's time to play a game. What is wrong with this picture? As you can see, obviously a leg is disjointed completely from my Conquest Gorilla over here, which kind of sucks, but I kind of expected something like this to happen eventually doing these retrospectives. Again, it's old NECA, they had QC problems, and finally, I guess it's kind of for the better, because now we have an example of what I was talking about. This was very common for NECA figures back then, not as much now, but basically, if we go ahead and look at the mechanics of this leg here, it seems like what they used to do, and if they still do it, they have a better way of doing it, is they have two legs here. One has the axle, and one has the socket. So I think this is meant to be the socketed one, and they did something, you can see that shine right there, that is meant to be adhesive, and they went a little bit too heavy on it. So I guess when they packed it oh so many years ago, it got a little rattled around, and somehow that just kind of popped right out. So I'm not too worried about that. I've repaired NECA figures before, so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to heat this guy up, drop him in boiling water, pull him apart a little bit, And then I might be able to loosen this joint so it moves again because it's totally sealed. And then what I could do is maybe get a Dremel, go into there, use like a rod of plastic or metal or something, and then kind of Dremel it back through there. And then they'll be attached once again. So I might be able to save this gorilla. If not, again, these guys aren't supposed to move a whole ton anyways. So worst case, I could just glue it in place forever. And then he'll kind of just be prefixed in the legs, but yeah, that kind of sucks. So I'm just hoping that Caesar's going to be fine. So let's give him a look as well. Whew. Okay, fortunately, Caesar and Aldo are just fine. Actually, Aldo is pretty much perfect. I'm not seeing any joints that are popped off. I'm not seeing anything warped or anything like that. So he's totally good. We'll put him aside. As for Caesar, though, there is one little minor thing, and that's that his trigger finger is bent up in a very strange way. That's just the way that he was packed way back when. And we already talked about the stiffness of this plastic, so I'm going to put him in hot water just so that's all better. Now it should push that finger right back in place. Another thing I want to try to do, I'm just going to mention this now because if I'm successful, then this won't be here when we actually go to review him. Caesar's collar here, which is really cool, has an amazing chain to it. I would actually like to remove it so it can more represent him at the very end of Conquest when he had that really huge monologue. So I'm going to try also popping the head off when I go to the heat. And I can remove the collar, and then that way it will be more film accurate to when he's running around with this really awesome looking assault rifle. So that's something I'd like to do. But yeah, pretty much in short, Aldo, just fine. Caesar, he's actually pretty much okay, just the finger. And I want to remove the collar just for my own preferences. And then we got the Conquest Gorilla. He's going to need a little bit of loving. Again, worst case, I'll just glue that in forever in a certain pose, and he'll still look pretty cool. I mean, the sucky thing is, I can't really replace him, right? Because they're no longer produced, and any of the other ones that are on eBay were skyrocketed in price. I happened to get very lucky with the set. I got them for stock. So I'm not going to have another shot at this. So I'm going to do the best I can with him, have some creative liberties with Caesar, but Aldo, it seems like he's good to go. So anyhow, next time you'll see me, we'll be in this review, and we'll see where everything's at. Alright, here we are back at the review room, and as you can see, I did find a solution. Unfortunately, it did wind up having to be the worst case. I had to glue it back in. Although, before I did that, I will show you a picture over here. I was able to drop the leg in the heat and actually fix the joint so it was able to move, but the unfortunate thing is I was not able to peg it back in. So what I effectively did is I warmed it up, used an X-Acto knife to cut at the adhesive, so I got the joint to be mobile, but as for socketing it in, I tried this method I've done before where I Dremel into both legs in that little peg and socket to get an extra little hole, and I got a little bit of a cutout paperclip to sort of simulate a swivel joint, but ultimately, it wound up being too loose, so I had the choice of either having a very loose joint that I'd have to keep plugging back in, then taking back out, or just ultimately gluing it in place. So obviously I went with the latter. I'm not even sure if the joints that I saved are still movable or not, so I'm just going to leave that leg totally as is. This one actually still moves, but as you can see, I've just prefixed it in a pose that I'm probably just always going to have this figure in anyways, but everything from waist up moves fine. There's no QC issues that I can see. So anyways, that's all that out of the way. Let's get into the Conquest Gorilla. Now, with all QC issues aside, this is actually a spectacular figure. Let's start off at the head sculpt, which is actually different from the other gorillas that we just reviewed. So if you turn up to the light a little bit, you can see the eyes a little bit better. I feel like they're actually just a little bit nicer than the gorillas we've already seen. I feel like the eyes aren't as modeled. I feel like the white doesn't blend in too much with the darker pupils. I think the printing was just a little bit better on this particular figure. As for the rest of the face, it looks like it's a lighter brown. It's not quite black like the rest of the mane or whatever it is that you want to call it going all around the head. Just a beautiful looking sculpt as always. And one of the best things about all three of these figures in relation to the Dr. Zaius and the gorillas that we just reviewed is the head movement. I know we're not at articulation yet, but as you can see, they definitely move a lot more. So you have many more posing options and a lot more attitude from these figures, which is very important for the Apes figures because, of course, as Roddy McDowell himself said, he had to overact through the masks in order for the emotions to come through. So since we obviously can't change the facial expressions, it is very important, especially important for the Apes figures, that we are able to move the head. So I'm glad that these figures move a little bit better than the other ones we saw. I'm not sure how much later these ones came out, but I believe that the SDCC pack came out a little bit later, maybe within the same year, but a little bit of time had passed. So I don't think they were manufactured exactly at the same time. As for the rest of the body, it is pretty basic, not a whole lot to look at, but it is still that very iconic orange prison suit that all the gorillas are equipped with in Conquest, the fourth installment of the series. So we just have orange going all the way down, except for the feet and the hands, but still, that's that iconic look that we saw in the movie. We have 4 pockets, which I find kind of interesting. I'm surprised they'd even give them pockets at all, I guess so they can carry the humans, tchotchkes, or whatever it is they got to deliver to them. And then as for the rest of it, it's really just more wrinkles and just some nice detail work. Not really any weathering that at least I can make out. If there is any, it's very, very faint to the point that I'm not seeing it, but regardless, the sculpt work is what carries this figure, and I'm perfectly good with this. I mean, even in the movies, the outfits were very pristine. They were never really dirtied or anything anyways, so not like this figure needs a patina or anything special going on. Down to the hands, we got the usual gorilla hands, and I think they are, yes, they are different from the gorillas we looked at, because this one does not have any kind of military gloves. These are gorillas in their most raw state before they start developing their own culture. As for the feet, they have these really cozy looking loafers. I actually wouldn't mind wearing these around my apartment. They look really nice, actually. How much are they on Amazon? Well, even though he had that leg problem, fortunately, I can kind of forgive that based on the fact that Conquest Gorilla does have the most accessories of this 3-pack. Over here, we have a single gauge shotgun. We also have a kitchen knife. We have a cleaver. Then we also have a trigger hand for the shotgun. And then one extra tighter gripping hand for one of the melee accessories. So on the figure himself, I don't remember what hands he came with by default, but over here we have another tighter grip, and then we got an open one here to support the shotgun. So you can have multiple options here. You could be wielding 2 melee weapons, which would be pretty kick-ass. I might have to try that. You could be wielding the shotgun, or you could also be wielding probably the best accessory being his giant riot shield, which is absolutely fantastic. Now, we're not going to review every single accessory in hand. That would just take forever, but we can go ahead and look at my preferred configuration for this figure, which is firstly the riot shield, which is actually easier to get in than you'd think. You just slide it in through that loop, then you get that little grip in the wider hand for the shotgun, and he holds it beautifully, and then you can just use all the arm work. Again, no joint issues up there, so that's totally fine. Actually, let's move him up a little bit so you guys can get a better gauge of this figure. So get him on this licensed NECA stand that I happen to have. And now we'll put that hand up. Actually push in a little bit more for you. There we go. And now we'll go ahead and get the cleaver, which is my preferred weapon for him. So slot that right in. And there we go. That's definitely the look that I prefer for this Conquest Gorilla. Just very makeshift. He kind of doesn't know what he's doing yet. He just knows that the things he's holding provide quite an ample amount of danger against the New York forces. I think they were in New York. I could be wrong. Chicago. It's hard to tell. It's such a pristine, quote-unquote, futuristic society. But regardless, I love this figure a lot. So much that I can get past the leg problem. Because, again, I'd probably be posing him like this anyways. If this was like a Batman or a Spider-Man, then I'd have a lot more reason to complain. But it's just a gorilla. All they do is walk and run and book it forward, and that's about it. So, yeah, the accessories, everything else is fine. And last thing I did want to mention is the posture of this figure. You can see that there is a little bit of a hunch. So if I'm very careful to push him down, I still have the swivel between these 2 legs that are synchronized. You do have a little bit of that simian hunch, which I really love. I don't think we got that on the other figures we saw, because I guess they're more evolved, so they're a little bit more upright. But here, he's a little bit more slouchy, and I just really love that. Very simple detail, but definitely adds to his character quite a bit. Very excellent figure, even though that joint sucks. And we're gonna have to cap off the review on Conquest Ape because fortunately enough, Caesar actually shares his exact same base body, so obviously it's going to be better if you look at articulation with him, but then just expect any articulation with Caesar correlates to this figure if we didn't have the QC problem with that leg. So anyways, moving on. Finally, here we are with my favorite figure in the entire series, being Roddy McDowell as... No, not Roddy McDowell as portrayed by Caesar. Caesar as portrayed by Roddy McDowell. One of my favorite acting performances, perhaps in film. I just really... I'm gonna go on a limb here. No tree pun intended with limb, like limb of a tree. My jokes are not up to par. I just woke up, okay? But the reason why I love his acting performance so much, in contrast with Andy Serkis, is throughout both films where we have adult Caesar in that original quintilogy, if I may call it that, is he is a good leader, but he at the same time he is very cowardly, very arrogant, very juvenile at times. But I feel like that lends to a greater character arc from him. And especially with Roddy McDowell's performance, he always seemed very scared, very cautious, just very unaware of the greater things going on in the world around him. Like, even towards the very end of the last film he was in, there was still so much for him to learn. And I really appreciated that depiction of a really great leader. Like, you have a leader who is obviously very good for his people and for the people who he innately despises based on their past, but at the same time, he is very flawed. He has many problems with discerning what the relationship between man and ape is supposed to be, and then that's especially emulated in that monologue at the very end of Conquest. Again, this entire body is exactly what we saw with the Conquest Gorilla, except no QC problems. And as you can see, I did manage to fix up that trigger finger. I dropped a whole bunch of hands in the hot water. This was one of the first things to get fixed, like, straight away, so not a problem there. As for this other hand here, we have an open hand. I believe these were the default hands that he came with, and this is more for holding his really awesome assault rifle that we will talk about. I believe it's an M4. Don't light me up if I'm wrong about that. I just know gun knowledge from video games, and that's all I got for you. But the rest of it is exactly the same jumpsuit, same hunch in the back, which I really love, as I've said, but this time all in green, which is what was customary for the chimpanzees, whereas the gorillas wore orange. And the orangutans in that movie were very fleeting. We did not see many of them. They weren't even there in the final riot, but they did have orange suits, which of course influenced their garb 2,000 years later, so it makes perfect sense. But of course, the most astounding detail on this figure is the face sculpt, and holy crap, they did a really good job here. Of all the apes we've seen thus far, this is one of the best cases where we can actually make out the eyes very well, and they are beautifully painted. Let me zoom in a little bit for you so you can get a better aspect ratio, or whatever the term is here. But ah, damn, this is just an absolutely gorgeous figure. I really love all the wrinkles that they did. Literally, my only issue is they got a little bit of a paint rub on the tip of the nose right there. That's something I could probably fix. Just get the right mix and then just skim that right over, and that should be no problem. As for the rest of the mane, pretty much what you expect. You got the ears coming out. It goes all right way around with the fur work, looking very beautiful. And the one thing here that I did want to mention is we do have this little cut at the bottom, which actually aesthetically looks fine. But the reason why that's there is for this collar and chain, which we discussed before, but we'll have a little look at that now. As I said, I wanted to remove this just for my own aesthetic preferences, but after putting him in hot water, I was able to pop off the head, and now we've got this loose accessory, which I can either put back on at my own whim, or I could put this on a custom figure, like I was recently working on a prison Superman from the Injustice video game, so maybe this is something I could give to him. But this accessory is so huge, we're going to actually have to pop back out once again. I actually tied up Caesar a little bit, there we go. But very beautiful, long, real chain. This is not like a plastic or anything. This is actually made of metal. On the end, we have two non-metal pieces, but we have this little loop right here in case you want like something of a slave master corralling him around. And then we have this main collar bit which goes around his neck. Again, you're going to want to pop this head back off, slot this on, then match up the little notch over here with that little slot in his head sculpt. And then that's how he comes out from the box initially. But I'm probably never going to put that color back on him again, just out of preference sake. As for the accessories which come detached from the figure, we have his assault rifle, which looks absolutely fantastic. I think they totally nailed the sculpt. It's a little bit warped towards the barrel over here, but I gave it a little bit of warmth. It unfortunately didn't go all the way straight, but it's closer than it was before, so I guess I can't complain. We also have two alternate tighter gripping hands. If you have any melee accessories, maybe you want to take something from the Conquest gorilla. I actually think these are the exact same hands from that gorilla, just repainted to, of course, match the chimpanzee color palette. And the last thing we have is something that's actually kind of useless. We have a pair of shackles, which is pretty neat, actually. So basically, you flip this around here, and then on either side, we have a peg and a hole, as you can see right there. And then ideally you were supposed to peg them together, but unfortunately they don't really stay at all. They kind of just slip right off. And also because of the way Caesar is articulated, the hands do not reach to the point that you can get both hands in both shackles. And I mean, they don't stay together anyways. That's kind of for naught. Would have been nice if they had like one of them being on a swivel joint. They can kind of swivel it onto the wrists. But so yeah, it's an accessory that you can't really use with him. But again, it's something that might be very cool for other custom projects. So I'm definitely going to save this and then the neck collar for another figure. I think that'd be very cool. Okay, and now we could talk about articulation with this base body, which we again saw in the gorilla. So as for head movement, again, it moves a lot better than we saw in the other figures, especially if you remove the collar piece. But we have some tilt going on. We got some forward. Let's see if it ratchets forward a little bit. A tad, yeah. So if you put a little extra gumption into there, you can go a little bit more forward. As terms of back, he can look a little bit up, not too bad. Also have some tilt, again, a little bit more motion in there. As for the arms, they swivel all the way around, though they V out a little bit because of the tunic. Not a very soft plastic, so that'd be why. As for coming out, not quite 90. As for elbows, also not 90. That's kind of what we expect at this point with these older NECA figures. We do have a swivel in the elbow. As for the wrists, they swivel all the way around. They have that much, let's stop that joint from moving. They have that much in, that much out, not as much. It could vary between hand to hand. You have a little bit down, and a little bit up. Sorry that I'm not doing a whole lot of hand swaps. It's just that I do not want to risk breaking any hand joints. It's one of my greatest fears with these older figures, so I'm just going to leave that as is if it's fine by you. We do have a waist swivel. Actually, I just noticed this now. The diaper portion is a separate sculpt from the upper body glove, so there's actually an unhindered swivel joint. It doesn't go like all the way 360, not that you'd need it to, but everything you need from it is in there. So that's actually great. I didn't even notice that before. That's really cool. Now we can look at legs. So they are supposed to come out this far, which is very good. Go back in. As for out, actually not too bad. As for back, about the same. Knees come out not to 90, but they do have some swivel. As for the ankles down here, we have not a ton back, though we do have a tad forward, and we do have a very, very slight rocker. Once more, it's the exact same ball joints that we see up here on the hands, which have since improved dramatically since figures from 2012, around that era. Now we can finally end with hopping straight into General Aldo. Even though he's a weird choice for this pack because the other figures are from Conquest and he's from Battle, then again, he was oddly enough cited in the credits for Conquest, so I guess he showed up in there at some point or was mentioned by name, but then again, he is one of my favorite figures in this pack. He was just the biggest surprise for me. I'm surprised at how well done he is. I think I was more excited about Caesar than anyone else, obviously, and the Conquest Gorilla, but I didn't know that I'd love Aldo this much as a figure. And as for Aldo as a character, of course he's no Koba, but I definitely loved Aldo, and I also love the Battle movie as well, even though that's on the bottom of a lot of people's lists. I just love how he's a totally pig-headed and stupid ape, not smart in any capacity, but he still poses somewhat of a threat. And then, of course, his final confrontation with Caesar is kinda hilarious in retrospect, but still, he is ultimately a villain at the end of the day, and he has a perfectly poetic death, especially after killing Cornelius Jr. First thing about this figure that blew me away, easily the head sculpt. I was so occupied with Roddy McDowell head that I wasn't even thinking about how well they'd approach Aldo, but they did such a good job capturing that expression, which can either be angry, having a little bit of fervor, or it could also be very cowardly in him trying to run away. His face is largely unchanged throughout the movie. He's not the most emotive, but it's kind of fitting for his character, so that makes sense. The eyes are also very well done. I also love the asymmetry in the mouth. It's a little bit of a snarling nature, or it's kind of a gape, like he's about to run away up into the trees, but they did a very good job. You got that ape mane going all the way around, as per usual. Also, some really nicely detailed teeth over here. I don't think we saw teeth on any of the other figures, have we? A little bit on the original gorillas, which we will have a look at later in size comparisons, but on here, this is where the teeth are most pronounced in all the figures, but the rest of the face is painted in black, nice gloss to it, just very beautiful all around. Now, down to the torso. Now, this definitely has the most elaborate body sculpt that we've seen of probably all the apes that we've looked at thus far. So over here, he has all these really cool-looking metal studs up at the neck. We also see this with Ursus, I believe, who, of course, doesn't exist for another 2,000 years. But kind of cool to see how their aesthetic has not changed for all that time, because, again, they like keeping things primitive, no pun intended. They also have this really nice sash with some little packs in there. I don't think he ever uses those in the movie, so I don't know what would be inside of them. Off to the arms, it's got more of that purple, which actually does vary from the gorilla soldiers that we looked at. On the gorilla soldiers, they're definitely a lot brighter, and they have a much more heavy wash. As for Aldo here, it's much more of a deep violet with no wash at all. So I actually don't mind either color palettes. I think they both look really good. As for the arms, we have some really beautiful gloves with some really interesting looking metal silver buckles or something going around them, which I really love. They're very well done. As for the hands, we got some padding here on the glove, looking very sharp. On the rest of the torso, we got that usual tunic that we've been seeing with the gorillas before. Then off to the side of this sash that he also has a little scabbard here for a blade that he has, which we'll look at when we get to accessories. But that is removable. Neither of these clips are metal. They're both plastic, so do be careful with those. We can go ahead and slot that back on with a little bit of finessing. There we go. I mean, not much at all, but there we go. Down to the legs, same violet color, along with some boots, and boots are boots. I say it again. I think Aldo has the least accessories, if I'm not mistaken. So the first thing we have here is this really awesome blade or dagger, whatever you want to call it. I'm tempted to call it a bayonet, but is a bayonet only a bayonet if it's attached to the end of a gun? I don't know, so you let me know. I'm really not too sure. But as for the rest, we have two accessories that I kind of just packed together because I'd have them no other way. But yes, this really awesome looking Tommy gun, along with a trigger hand to hold it, obviously. But it's very beautifully detailed. I didn't mention this with Caesar's assault rifle, but they have also got that usual loop to go around the shoulder. Not as well sculpted as the guns that we saw on the other gorillas, but still, it's pretty neat. It's nice to have.
No prisoners!
No surprises with articulation, again, except for head movement. We have that much tilt, and even the sash doesn't really get in the way. I feel like it's pretty even on both sides. As for down, again, you can kind of push that a little bit. Not too bad. Not a whole ton back, but pretty much just as much as Caesar. Also have, we already talked about tilt, my apologies. We have swivel in the head, swivel in the shoulders. Definitely not going to be 90 at the elbows, so you have swivel. You have not much in, but you do have some out, then up and down the wrists, along with your usual swivel. As for the torso, we got a swivel somewhere up here, like just below the pecs, I feel. As for legs, they come out that much, go back in, forward, not a whole ton, going back, pretty much the same. Knees, not 90, but you got a swivel. On the ankles, we have a little bit back, a little bit more forward. Then we got just a tad of rocker. Actually better than the CONQUEST gorilla and Caesar over there. So, great figure. I love this guy a lot. He's the one that surprised me the most. As for size comparisons, their height against all the other Apes figures we looked at is absolutely phenomenal. We have one of the 2-pack gorillas over here, and even though I have Aldo on top of this horse, which we had a little look at before in the previous review if you want to check that out, Aldo is a little bit taller than the standard gorilla, which I really like. As for the rest of them, pretty much this exact same height, which is totally fine. Bear in mind that Caesar is crouched down just a little bit, as well as the Conquest Gorilla, and he also has a stand, so it's a little bit funky. But we also got them next to Dr. Zaius, and then I don't know why he's here, but we also have McFarlane Doomslayer, so there's him if you want like a slightly larger than life human to compare them with. And then to wrap this up, down here we have Star Wars The Black Series Modified Mechamuck. Cast out your hatred, for today we have seen the birth of the planet of the apes.
Yeah, hi, Quacky and Monkey Lizard here. Do those rights also apply to my species as well?
No. Despite the problems I had, these are all a whole bunch of awesome figures. As for Aldo, again, he's one that surprised me the most. I was very shocked at the really accurate details, and just the way that they padded him out to make him look very general looking, with all the extra studs, the gauntlets, and everything, just to give him a little bit more punch. As for Caesar, I knew he was going to be good, and he turned out to be even better. I really loved all the accessories he came with, and I was very happy that I was able to remove the collar as I planned to do, so it could again more represent him towards the end of Conquest. And then as for the Conquest Gorilla, he's the one that we had the most problems with, but again, can kind of get past that, because the default position that I wound up having him in is pretty much where I'd have him if the joints are perfectly intact, so really it's no skin off my nose. But again, that's why these retrospectives are so important. It's always a big deal that we go ahead and look back at old figures that they've done in the past from lines that we currently have now for several reasons. First of all, reviews have changed since a decade ago, or even 5 years ago. There's new formats, there's new details to talk about, and there's kind of that way of looking back onto figures in order to objectively judge current figures better. So back then, we didn't have a whole lot of NECA figures to look back on at the time of these guys releasing. But now that we've gotten a lot of modern figures, like we have Universal Monsters, Predators, and Aliens that we've been looking on this channel every once in a while, we can look back on guys like Planet of the Apes and kind of see the differences that have happened. Again, the biggest change is, I think, the way they articulate the wrists. Back then it was just either a ball joint or a mushroom peg, but now they have straight up a hinge going through and then a peg that goes into the wrist instead of the other way around. And then also the way that they did the legs. Actually, speaking of that, let me bring in another figure here. So over here on the left, I have my very heavily modified Batman from the Batman vs. Alien pack, which was, interestingly enough, also a Comic-Con exclusive. And when I say heavily modified, it's for very similar reasons why the Conquest Gorilla has been what he's been through, although things were a little bit different. For this Batman, I think he released around the same time, his legs were extremely stiff, but nothing was broken. So that meant I was actually able to save this one. I put him in hot water, I loosened up the joints over like a solid hour. Like really, it took that much moving around the joints, loosening up the paint to get everything working again. Then I even had to cut up into the crotch. Don't cringe, I'm sorry about that. And then I had to add a little bit of like a Bandai sprue part to hold everything together a little bit more tightly with some glue. And basically, it's a miracle that this guy worked out at all. Then I also modified the cape many times throughout the years, and I recently rewired it so that way it would be posable, and also used some like cloth glue that I recently purchased to put all that together. But that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like, for him, the joints are totally stiff. For the gorilla, a joint was totally broken. So when it comes to older figures like this, if you're ever interested in getting them, remember there's always going to be that risk of something going to be broken or stuck or just not the way that it should be. And unfortunately, you can't really replace them because they're all in third party right now. They're all effectively retired figures. But once you learn the way to fix them, or you know what you're doing going into it, when you see a problem, then you can kind of go from there. Again, for me, it doesn't bug me as much because I'm a customizer. If, like, that leg popped off, the reason why I didn't panic is because I've done this before, not my first rodeo. Let's just figure out a way to solve this, and I did. But if you like your figures to be totally intact, maybe you want to beware of older figures and just stray away from them completely and just focus on the new ones and hope that figures that they've done in the past will be re-released and with better quality and QC control and all that. So you could be more rest assured that they're not having any issues. Like all the Predators and Universal Monsters that we did look at that came out in recent years, all of them have been absolutely perfect. Not a single QC problem from what I can recall. I think the worst thing that's ever happened is like a Predator combi stick was warped, but I mean, no one uses the combi sticks anyway, so I'm fine with that. But when it comes to like the joints, I think that's the biggest problem an action figure can have. It reduces mobility, and there's less things that you can do with it. So these are two cases where pretty much the same problem happened. To the gorilla, a much worse degree. For him, it was a matter of I gotta just glue it in. That's the only option. But for Batman, somehow I found a way to fix him up. Now he's totally immobile. Nothing's breaking off. Nothing's stiff, and he works just fine. So I don't know. That's just a quick little note that I wanted to pop in. But all that being said, that's kind of all I have to say here, so I'm not going to bring all the other apes in to conclude this video. I've said what I had to say, but that's about all. If you have any other questions about QC problems with older figures, especially if you're considering getting any, go ahead and ask some questions in the comments. I'm sure there's some tips I can offer to you. There's some other folks out there who might be able to tip you off. There's a community out there. Like, we know old NECA has a lot of problems, but as for new NECA, it's a whole different world. They do a much better job. Don't let the old figures deter you from getting the new ones. It's a whole new ball game. The figures they do now are basically perfect, which is why I'm going to keep collecting them. But still, I like to do the occasional retrospective because, again, it's important that we look back to see how things have changed, and oh boy, haven't they. So if you enjoyed this retrospective and would like to see more in the future and have a look at ones we've done in the past, then please, as per usual, be sure to like, comment,
and subscribe.
Ugh! Suffer the little children!
Thank you guys so much for watching. Take it easy, rock on, and I will see you all later. And there are two versions of that monologue, where in the original director's cut, he has the first half of that monologue where they wind up just slaughtering the humans around them. But in the second version, which I have watched and what was approved by test screening audiences, he goes on about how if humans are to be dominated, they should be dominated with compassion. And for me, that is the ending I grew up with, and it's just the one that makes the most sense for me. But then again, I'd love to watch a director's cut one day. That's on a Blu-ray, so I might have to invest in that at some point. But that might change my opinion. But at least for now, the way I view Caesar, it really does fall back to that two-part monologue that we get in the new cut of Conquest, which I absolutely love.